Deshaun Walker stepped off the subway, his boots clicking against the cracked pavement as he made his way through the bustling streets of the city. The skyline above him was a jagged mixture of towering glass buildings and older structures, a testament to the city's history of ambition and reinvention. He took a deep breath, the crisp air of early spring filling his lungs, and adjusted the strap of his leather satchel. Inside, nestled carefully between folded sheets of plastic, were the pieces that might finally change everything for him, his artwork. For most of his life, Deshaun had struggled. As a black artist, doors were rarely opened for him in a world where the art industry was dominated by elites who didn't look like him. He'd spent years in small, local galleries, fighting for recognition while battling the constant undertones of racism and bias. His talent was undeniable, but to many, his skin color made him invisible, an afterthought, or a novelty. The idea of a black artist making it big in the high-end art world felt like an impossible dream, but it was a dream he couldn't let go of. He had spent sleepless nights working on his paintings, pouring his soul into every brushstroke, creating pieces that were raw and emotional, filled with the stories of his people and the struggles they endured. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed enough. His gallery shows were usually sparsely attended, his pieces often sold at discounted prices, just to make ends meet. But today he was determined to change things. The grand, upscale gallery in front of him promised an opportunity for something more. It wasn't just any gallery, it was Hall & Company Gallery, one of the most prestigious galleries in the city. A place where artists were discovered, elevated, and sold for millions. Deshaun had heard whispers about the gallery from other artists in the city, but he'd never imagined he'd have the chance to walk through those doors himself. He took one last look at the building's polished facade, a gleaming temple of art and privilege, before walking through its grand double doors. Inside, the space was bathed in soft light, the walls lined with expensive-looking paintings, each one framed in immaculate white and gold. The air was filled with the quiet hum of conversation, murmurs of collectors, curators, and wealthy buyers discussing their latest acquisitions. Deshaun felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had never been in a space like this, and for a moment, he wondered if he truly belonged here. But he straightened his shoulders, squared his jaw, and reminded himself why he was there. He had work to do. He walked past the first few rooms, his eyes scanning the paintings, the sculptures, and the installations. Everything about the space screamed exclusivity. The paintings on the walls were filled with abstract shapes, muted tones, and expensive-sounding names. Names that meant little to Deshaun, but carried weight in the world of high art. He could hear the click of polished shoes on the marble floor behind him, and he turned to see a middle-aged man approaching him. The man had a thin, well-groomed beard, a suit that looked like it cost more than Deshaun's monthly rent, and a dismissive air that made Deshaun instantly uncomfortable. The man extended his hand without smiling. "Roger Hall," he said, his voice thick with arrogance. Deshaun shook the man's hand firmly. "Deshaun Walker. I'm an artist." "An artist," Roger Hall repeated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm afraid we don't usually feature unknowns in our gallery. Our clientele prefers established names, people with a certain pedigree." He made a small motion with his hand, dismissing Deshaun as though he were just another passerby, someone who had wandered in by mistake. Deshaun held back a wince. He had grown used to this kind of treatment, but it still stung. "I have some of my work in my bag. I'd appreciate it if you'd take a look." Roger's eyes flickered briefly at the satchel over Deshaun's shoulder, his lips curling in a subtle sneer. "Your work? Look, son, no offense, but it's unlikely you have anything of value to offer here." He paused, sizing up Deshaun. "This is a serious gallery. People like you don't usually fit in. Why don't you go show your pieces somewhere else?" The words hit Deshaun harder than he cared to admit. He had come here with hope, with the dream that maybe, just maybe, he could prove himself in a world that had constantly rejected him. But here was Roger Hall, dismissing him with nothing more than an assumption based on his appearance. It was as if his race had already determined his worth before he even had a chance to speak. Deshaun didn't let his emotions show. Instead, he forced a smile, the kind of smile that hid the ache in his chest. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Hall. I'll be on my way." Without waiting for a reply, Deshawn turned and walked towards the door. As he passed through the gallery's elegant entrance, he could feel Roger's eyes on him, but he didn't dare turn around. He had heard enough. The world of elite art was as cold and unwelcoming as he had always feared. Outside the gallery, Deshawn took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly. He knew that this moment could have been a crushing blow to his spirit, but instead, it fueled something else, a quiet fire deep inside him. This was not the end. He wouldn't let it be. As Deshawn walked away from Hall and Company Gallery, his mind raced. He thought about the countless hours spent perfecting his craft, the stories behind every painting, and the message he was trying to convey. Roger Hall had no idea what he had just dismissed. Deshawn's art was not just paint on canvas, it was the voice of an entire community, one that refused to be silenced. He had been humiliated, yes. But he also had something Roger would never understand. The drive, the heart, and the vision that had brought him this far. He wasn't giving up. Not today, not ever. He would make them see. He would show them all. And when the time was right, he would return, not as a struggling artist, but as the one in control. He glanced up at the skyline once more and made a silent promise to himself, "I will prove them wrong." The battle was just beginning. Deshawn Walker stood in front of his easel, his eyes focused on the canvas before him. The quiet hum of the city outside his studio window was a stark contrast to the chaos of his thoughts. The years of struggle, of being overlooked and underestimated, had only sharpened his determination. Now, after the encounter at Hall and Company Gallery, Deshawn was more focused than ever. He didn't need the validation of a man like Roger Hall or anyone else. His work would speak for itself. In the months that followed, Deshawn dedicated himself completely to his art. He worked tirelessly, perfecting his craft, refining his style, and pouring every ounce of emotion into his paintings. His small apartment, which had once felt cramped and stifling, had now transformed into a creative sanctuary. Canvas after canvas filled the walls, each piece a raw exploration of identity, struggle, and resilience. The colors were bold, the strokes fierce, the subjects poignant. Deshawn's art told stories, stories that people could feel deep in their bones. The breakthrough came when Deshawn received an unexpected phone call one afternoon. He had just finished a large piece that he was particularly proud of, a portrait of a young black woman standing tall against a backdrop of swirling storm clouds. It was a piece that embodied the strength and endurance of black women throughout history. As he was cleaning up his brushes, his phone buzzed, and he picked it up without thinking. "Hello, is this Deshawn Walker?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Deshawn," he replied, wiping paint off his hands. "Hi, I'm Sophia Lee, I'm an art dealer, and I came across your work. I have to say, I'm quite impressed. I think your paintings have the potential to reach a much wider audience. Would you be interested in discussing the possibility of an exhibition?" The words didn't immediately register. Deshawn had been rejected by so many galleries, so many critics, that he almost didn't believe it was real. But Sophia's calm, assured voice made him believe this time was different. Yes. I would love to," he finally managed to say, his heart racing. "When can we meet?" A few weeks later, Deshawn found himself sitting in an upscale coffee shop in the city's art district, across from Sophia Lee, who had a sharp, professional look about her. She was dressed in a tailored black blazer, her hair pulled into a neat bun. Her sharp eyes scanned Deshawn's portfolio as he sat nervously in front of her. "I've seen a lot of work, Deshawn. I've seen a lot of talent, but yours is special. You've got something that's both raw and refined. It's the kind of work that makes people stop and think," Sophia said, flipping through the images in his portfolio. Deshawn nodded, unsure of what to say. It was hard for him to accept compliments. For so long, he had been conditioned to believe that people like him weren't supposed to be artists, that their work would never hold the same weight as the works of those with prestigious pedigrees. But Sophia's words were different. They weren't laced with the dismissiveness he had grown used to. "I want to help you," she continued. "I think you should be showcased in one of the top galleries. A place like the Trenton Museum, for example. I can get you an exclusive exhibition there, give you the exposure you need. But you'll have to trust me and the direction I take your career." Deshawn swallowed. "I trust you. I want to do this. I'm ready." The exhibition at the Trenton Museum was a turning point in Deshawn's career. The night of the opening, he was filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. The museum was grand, its halls adorned with magnificent works of art from both renowned and emerging artists. Deshawn's paintings were displayed in a carefully curated section, each piece positioned to capture the light in unique ways. The crowd that gathered was filled with art critics, collectors, and museum-goers, many of whom had never heard of Deshawn Walker before. But as they wandered through the exhibit, stopping to admire his pieces, whispers began to circulate. There was something about Deshawn's art, something bold and unapologetic, that commanded attention. His pieces weren't just about the art, they were about a story. They were about the lived experience of Black people, about culture, about history. And that story resonated with people in a way that made them pause, reflect, and engage. By the end of the evening, Deshawn had sold several of his pieces for amounts that would have seemed impossible just a year ago. The critics were singing his praises, and collectors were already asking how they could acquire his work for their private collections. It was a dream come true, but Deshawn was careful not to get too caught up in the excitement. He knew that this was just the beginning. As his name spread, so did his reputation. Deshawn's work began to be featured in more prestigious exhibitions, and his paintings fetched higher and higher prices. He was invited to art fairs in New York, Los Angeles, and Chicago, where collectors from all over the world vied for a chance to purchase one of his pieces. The art world, once so distant and unattainable, was now within his reach. Yet despite all of this success, Deshawn remained grounded. He never forgot where he came from, nor did he let the success go to his head. He stayed humble, visiting smaller galleries to mentor young artists, particularly those from underserved communities, encouraging them to believe in their talents, despite the obstacles they might face. Deshawn's story became one of resilience, a testament to the power of perseverance and self-belief. One evening, as he sat in his modest studio working on his latest piece, his phone rang. It was Sophia Lee, and she had news. "We've just secured a major deal," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement. "A collector from London wants to purchase an entire series of your work. The deal is worth 6 figures. It's going to be huge for your career." Deshawn couldn't believe it. 6 figures. His art was now worth that much. But as the shock wore off, a sense of calm settled over him. He had worked hard for this, and he had earned it. But more importantly, he knew this was just another step forward, another milestone on the road to his ultimate goal, to be recognized by the highest echelons of the art world, the very place where Roger Hall's gallery sat. Meanwhile, in the world that Deshawn was so eager to conquer, Roger Hall remained blissfully unaware of the rising star. He continued to dominate the upper echelons of the art world, hosting his exclusive exhibitions, and mocking those he deemed unworthy of attention. His disdain for emerging artists, particularly those from marginalized communities, had not softened one bit. He continued to dismiss their work as trendy or uninspired, reinforcing the same ignorant, elitist attitudes that had kept him in power for so long. Roger's continued arrogance was a stark contrast to Deshawn's quiet rise. As Deshawn's work gained recognition, it became clear that the art world was changing. New voices were being heard, and a new generation of artists was demanding attention. Deshawn was one of the leaders of that change. He knew that eventually, Roger Hall would notice him. And when that day came, Deshawn would be ready. Deshawn's rise was not just about success, it was about something deeper. It was about proving to himself and the world that he belonged in the highest echelons of the art world. But it was also about creating space for others who had been excluded, elevating their voices alongside his. He had made it this far, but he knew there was still so much more to do. And so, as his name spread and his work became a symbol of strength and resilience, Deschamps' focus never wavered. He had a bigger vision in mind, to create a world where artists like him could thrive, not just survive. Deschamps Walker stood in the opulent ballroom of the Grandview Hotel, the soft hum of conversation and the clink of champagne glasses filling the air. The art gala was one of the most prestigious events on the art world calendar, a night where collectors, curators, and influencers came together to view and purchase the finest works of art. Deschamps had been invited as one of the featured artists, a testament to how far he had come since that fateful day at Hall & Company Gallery. His heart swelled with pride as he looked around at the sea of faces, many of them familiar, but there was one person in the room who Deschamps was particularly interested in seeing, Roger Hall. Since their first encounter, Deschamps' career had skyrocketed. His works were now selling for millions, and he had become a symbol of success and resilience in the art world. His gallery was flourishing, attracting attention from both established and emerging artists, and his exhibitions were selling out across the globe. But there was still one thing he had yet to do: confront Roger Hall, the man who had dismissed him so arrogantly all those months ago. The gala was the perfect opportunity. Roger's gallery was participating in the event, and Deschamps knew this would be his moment to make a statement. The art world had changed, and Deschamps was at the forefront of that change. Roger, however, remained blissfully unaware of the fire that was burning just beneath the surface. Deschamps casually moved through the crowd, exchanging pleasantries with fellow artists and collectors. As he sipped his champagne, he noticed Roger Hall standing in a corner, surrounded by a group of wealthy buyers and influential critics. Roger was in his element, the center of attention, as usual. His sharp suit and polished demeanor screamed power and arrogance. But Deschamps knew better now. He wasn't the struggling artist who had been dismissed by Roger. He was a force in the art world, and tonight, Roger was going to realize it. The night wore on, and the gala was in full swing. Deschamps' work was on display, drawing a crowd of curious onlookers. His latest pieces, a series of striking portraits that explored the complexities of Black identity, were being met with praise from critics and admiration from buyers. As he moved through the crowd, he overheard snippets of conversation. Deschamps Walker. I hear his paintings are worth millions now. His work is so raw, so real. It's got this power that I haven't seen in a long time. Deschamps couldn't help but smile to himself. This was the world he had fought for, a world that not only recognized his talent but celebrated it. It was then that he heard Roger's voice across the room, cutting through the noise like a sharp blade. Take a look at this one, Roger said, his tone dismissive as he pointed toward a painting by a lesser-known artist. Amateurish at best. I mean, the colors are all wrong, and the subject matter is so cliché. Who even buys this garbage? It's just trendy nonsense. Deschamps turned toward the source of the voice and saw Roger standing with a few collectors, his back to the crowd. Roger's words were biting, his laughter echoing through the room as he continued to mock the artwork. But it wasn't just the painting that caught Deschamps' attention, it was the artist. Standing next to Roger, a young Black artist named Malik Johnson was trying to defend his work, but Roger wasn't having it. Malik's shoulders were slumped, his confidence visibly shaken by the scorn he was receiving. Deschamps could see the look of disappointment in Malik's eyes, and it reminded him of himself when he had been dismissed by Roger all those months ago. Malik had clearly been trying to make a name for himself in the same way Deschamps had, but it was clear Roger had no interest in seeing his potential. Malik was just another artist to him, someone to be discarded because they didn't fit the narrow mold Roger had created for success in the art world. Deschamps' blood began to boil. He had been where Malik was, and he knew the pain of being dismissed by people who had no understanding of what art truly meant. But now he was no longer the unknown artist. Now, he had the power to change things, to make Roger see the value in artists like Malik, in artists like himself. The time had come. Deschamps straightened his back and walked toward Roger Hall, his steps measured and deliberate. As he approached, the conversation around Roger quieted. Roger, noticing the shift in the air, turned to face him. A smug smile curled on his lips as he looked Deshaun up and down, not recognizing him at first. Well, if it isn't one of the struggling artists from the city, Roger said, his tone dripping with condescension. I didn't think you'd make it to an event like this. I have to say, I'm surprised. Deshaun didn't flinch. He met Roger's gaze squarely and spoke calmly. Funny, I remember you saying the same thing to me months ago at your gallery, Roger. Do you remember that? The day you told me my work wasn't worth your time? Roger's smile faltered slightly as the words sank in. For a moment, he looked confused, as if trying to place Deshaun's face. Then, it clicked. Recognition flickered in Roger's eyes, followed by a flicker of embarrassment. You, Roger stammered, clearly taken aback. Wait, you're the artist from that day? Deshaun nodded, his voice steady. Yes, I'm the artist you dismissed as amateurish. But things have changed. My work is now worth millions, Roger. And I've built a gallery that is reshaping the art world. I'm not the unknown artist you once thought I was. The room around them fell silent as the weight of Deshaun's words hung in the air. Roger's expression shifted from amusement to shock as the realization dawned on him. His face flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. You can't be serious, Roger muttered, his arrogance faltering. Deshaun's gaze was unwavering. I'm offering you a chance, Roger. You can represent me in your gallery if you want. I'm sure your clients would love to add one of my pieces to their collections. But I won't beg for your validation. I've moved on. Roger opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. He had never imagined this moment, Deshaun, the artist he had mocked, standing before him with the power to dictate the terms of their relationship. I don't need your approval anymore, Roger, Deshaun continued. But I do want you to know that I'm building something that will support and uplift artists from all backgrounds, especially those who have been overlooked, like Malik here. He gestured toward Malik, who was watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. It's time for a change in this industry, and I'm the one making that change. Without waiting for Roger's response, Deshaun turned on his heel and walked away. The crowd parted as he passed, and behind him, he could hear whispers of admiration and respect. Deshaun didn't need to look back to know that the message had been received. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. As Deshaun mingled with influential guests and collectors, he could see Roger standing in the corner, his face red with humiliation. Roger's once dominant presence in the art world was fading, and Deshaun was taking his place. By the time the gala came to a close, Deshaun had made several connections with powerful figures who were eager to collaborate with him. His gallery became a hot topic of conversation, and word spread that Deshaun Walker was not just an artist, he was a force to be reckoned with. Roger, on the other hand, watched as his empire slowly crumbled. The same arrogance that had once served him was now his undoing. Deshaun had shown him that the art world was changing, and Roger was no longer a part of that change. Deshaun left the gala with a sense of satisfaction, knowing that his journey had only just begun. He had faced the man who once underestimated him, and he had won. Roger Hall had always prided himself on his position in the art world. As the owner of Hall & Company Gallery, he had been a kingmaker for years, bringing in collectors, curators, and artists whose work defined the high-end art scene. He had built his empire on the backs of the well-established, the wealthy, and the elite, all of whom flocked to his gallery because it was the place where real art was showcased. But in the wake of his encounter with Deshaun, everything began to change. And fast. It started with a slow but steady decline. First, there were murmurs among the artists. The ones who had once worked with Roger were now reconsidering their options. Many of them had always felt the sting of his elitism, but they had remained loyal to the exposure and opportunities his gallery had provided. But after that night, when Deshaun had publicly challenged Roger, many began to question their association with him. As the weeks passed, more and more artists pulled their work from Hall & Company. Gallery, citing Roger's dismissive attitude toward emerging voices, particularly those from underrepresented communities. The word spread quickly through the art world, and soon, even the collectors who had once been Roger's most devoted patrons began to pull back. The gallery's reputation, once sterling, began to tarnish with every passing day. Roger's inability to adapt to the changing landscape of the art world had become his downfall. It wasn't long before the financial troubles started to mount. The sales slowed. The gallery's exhibition openings, once packed with the city's elite, now struggled to fill seats. Roger Hall had no one to blame but himself. His refusal to embrace diversity, to support new voices and new perspectives, had made him irrelevant in a world that was rapidly evolving. He had made the mistake of believing that the status quo would last forever. The final blow came when a major patron, one of the largest investors in Roger's gallery, announced they would no longer be working with him. They were moving their investments to Deschamps' gallery, citing the vision and inclusivity that Deschamps had brought to the art world. Deschamps' gallery was thriving, its sales skyrocketing, and Roger's once thriving empire was crumbling. Roger spent his days pacing the halls of his nearly empty gallery, the walls adorned with paintings that no longer held the same allure. The place felt hollow, a museum of what once was. He had spent years cultivating an image of superiority, of being the gatekeeper to the art world's most exclusive circles. But in the end, it was his ignorance that had driven the art world away. While Roger's gallery descended into chaos, Deschamps' path continued upward. His gallery, which had initially started as a small, independent venture, had grown into a beacon of change in the art world. Where Roger's gallery had been a fortress of exclusivity, Deschamps was a hub of creativity and inclusion. Artists from all walks of life, from marginalized communities to the most daring new voices, found a home in Deschamps' gallery. The themes of his exhibitions were as bold as his vision. He curated shows that challenged stereotypes, that pushed boundaries, and that spoke to the struggles and triumphs of the people who had long been silenced in the art world. He became known for giving a platform to those who had been overlooked by galleries like Roger's, Black artists, Indigenous artists, queer artists, and others whose work challenged the dominant narratives of the art world. Deschamps' gallery became a cultural touchstone. Collectors from around the world flocked to his exhibits, eager to get a glimpse of the work that was not only changing the face of contemporary art, but was also redefining the very idea of what art could be. His success was not just measured in the millions of dollars his work and exhibitions brought in, but in the opportunity he had created for others. The sense of community that Deschamps had fostered within his gallery became a symbol of empowerment for those who had long been excluded from the art world's upper echelons. As Deschamps' gallery reached new heights, Roger Hall found himself retreating into the shadows of his own making. The art world that had once admired him was now turning its back. His gallery was a ghost of its former self, a place where the paintings seemed to sigh in the empty halls. And then, one day, a realization hit Roger as he walked through the almost vacant space. He had made a catastrophic mistake. He thought back to the night of the gala, the moment when Deschamps had confronted him, calm but resolute, about his dismissive behavior. At the time, Roger had dismissed Deschamps' words as a momentary lapse of respect. He had thought that the young artist was just another upstart who would soon fade into obscurity. But now, Roger could see the truth. Deschamps wasn't just an artist. He was a force. A change that had come to stay. And it was a change that Roger, in his arrogance, had failed to recognize. Roger decided that he needed to see for himself what Deschamps had built. He wasn't prepared for the experience that awaited him. When Roger walked into Deschamps' gallery, he was immediately struck by the energy that filled the space. It was a stark contrast to the lifeless atmosphere of his own gallery. The walls were filled with works that were as diverse as the artists themselves. The air buzzed with conversation as collectors, critics, and artists mingled, their voices full of excitement and admiration. It was clear that Deschamps' gallery wasn't just a business, it was a movement. As Roger wandered through the exhibit, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of regret. Deschamps had created a space where art was no longer about the status quo, where success wasn't defined by the amount of money a piece could command but by the impact it had on the world. Deshaun had built something Roger could never have imagined. And he had done it by being true to his vision, by refusing to play the game Roger had played for so many years. Roger walked up to one of the young artists in the gallery, a black woman whose work was being showcased for the first time. She smiled at him, her eyes filled with pride. "Isn't it incredible?" she said. "Deshaun gave me a chance when no one else would." The words hit Roger like a punch to the gut. He had dismissed artists like her, believing they weren't worthy of attention. He had been blind to the incredible talent that had been sitting right in front of him, simply because he had refused to look beyond the narrow confines of his own worldview. Roger knew then that he had made a choice that would haunt him for the rest of his career. He had been part of an art world that had thrived on exclusion, on elitism. And in doing so, he had missed the opportunity to be part of something far greater, something that Deshaun had built with passion, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to lifting others up. Roger reached out to Deshaun a few weeks later, his tone sincere. He asked if they could meet, if he could apologize for his past behavior and perhaps collaborate on a future project. Deshaun listened to his message with quiet patience, but when he responded, there was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet finality. "Roger, I appreciate that you've come to understand the importance of diversity and inclusion," Deshaun said. "But I've moved on. I'm not looking for validation from you or anyone else. My gallery is my statement. And I'm focused on building something that's about more than just making art, it's about making space for others to shine." Roger's heart sank. He had hoped for more, but he understood. He knew that Deshaun had every right to leave the past behind him. Roger had failed to see the value of what Deshaun represented. Now, all he could do was watch as the art world evolved without him.